All right, to get across a busy day in Canberra, let's bring in our Sky News political editor, Andrew Clennell. Great to have you back on Credlin here, Andrew. You were in Canberra, all about transparency today in question time. The coalition, both Peter Dutton and Susan Lee, both follow the story you broke last week about the ministerial code of conduct. Have a listen.
Prime Minister was the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories ever in breach of the Prime Minister's code of conduct.
Is the Prime Minister aware of any other ministers who have breached the ministerial code of conduct?
My government has been transparent. We have a code of conduct. When there have been any issues, there have been... Oh, come on.
All right, Andrew, the PM campaigned pretty heavily, as you know, on transparency and integrity. If, as the Minister admitted, she's breached the ministerial code of conduct, what's the penalty?
Well, I saw Scott Morrison sack several ministers over breaches of the code of conduct. Anthony Albanese was asked in question time, what is the penalty for a breach? And he sort of ducked the question. He declined to answer it because if he said it's sacking, he'd have to sack Kristy McBain. Now, he says it's an oversight. It does appear to be an oversight what she did, but it also appears she was trying to be sneaky. On July 7, Anthony Albanese introduced a new ministerial code of conduct that forbade ministers from holding shares and said they had to relinquish them immediately. She transferred them to her husband. And the code also forbids that. It says if you have to divest yourself of shares, you can't transfer them to a family member. So it was only last week, at a time that we contacted her about these shareholdings that she transferred to her husband, that she actually started moving to sell them. So that's a breach. She may not have read the code of conduct, which is frankly unbelievable. It would be the first thing I'd be reading as a minister, but it is nevertheless a breach. So yes, they've been under a bit of heat on this one, mostly because they were saying we're purer than the driven snow. And I think Kristy McBain's embarrassed the Labor side.
Spot on. I'd be seeking an FOI and any briefing she got from her department about the code. I presume new ministers and their officers would have been fully briefed on the changes. I think you posit the point there, but I think this very much was more cover-up than honest mistake. And I'll tell you why. Have a listen to her answer, the language specifically in her answer in the chamber today.
When did the Minister first make contact with the Prime Minister or his office concerning this matter?
I divested the shares to my husband prior to receiving a written code of conduct. Once I reviewed the written code of conduct, I went immediately spoke to the Prime Minister's office. I then put in place a series of events to sell those shares. And once that was done, I reported back to the Prime Minister's office that I'd completed that transaction.
All right, Andrew, if, as she claims, she transferred the shares to her husband and they became then his property, why then does she admit in that answer in the Parliament that she's the one who organised the sale of his shares and only when it becomes a political problem? I mean, all the way through that answer, it's I did this, I gave them to him, they're his property. She thinks she gets around the code in that way. But she's then the one who moves to sell his property. I think this is a retrofitted story only after you caught her out.
Oh, no doubt about it. She doesn't say when. Well, when? It was last week. That's when she actually sold them. And the code does say she can't just give them to her husband. So she obviously thought that was a way to keep hold of the shares, perhaps until they increased in price. But it wasn't. That's forbidden by the code as well. So it just looks like a prima facie breach. And Anthony Albanese looks to be letting her off the hook because she's a beginner, frankly.
Yeah, I call BS on this. I was there for 16 years and I never, ever held a share in my own name for this exact reason. You move portfolio, you end up forced to sell at a time you don't want because of potential conflict of interest. You are better off as an MP, and I support the PM's decision on this. Get right out of them if you're a minister. All right, let's go to this rate increase today. The cash rate's gone up 2.35%. This is the highest rate we've seen, the official cash rate, since December 2014. We've got that power price promise. A bit more heat today. I was surprised there wasn't enough on it yesterday from the opposition. Now it links with a potential increase by the banks to this mortgage rate. We've got the budget due in October. I've just come back from overseas. I mean, absolutely cost of living is the only issue they're talking about in the UK, and it's starting to bite here too.
Oh, there's just no doubt about it, Peter. I mean, it has been significantly worse in the UK. It's extraordinary what's happening there. And look, the government and the Reserve Bank have to be careful it doesn't get that out of control here. It's really hurting. 6% inflation, the most consecutive interest rate increases since 1994, albeit then it was a higher rate that they were starting from, and petrol way up. People are copying it left, right and centre. And it's a difficult thing for the government to solve. I mean, you put some sugar hits in there to help people out, that just increases inflation. We know when they take the petrol subsidy off or return that excise onto petrol, 22 cents a litre, on September 28, as they're planning to do, Treasury says that in itself will increase inflation by 0.25%. So, look, people are talking about the fact maybe the Reserve Bank are going too hard and fast. They need to do 0.25 next time. But they've shown a real ability at the moment to do 0.5 a month. And there's nothing to stop that occurring for the next couple of months. And people would then, I think a lot of people have a right to be quite angry with Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe. And I question him staying in the job when he promised in 2020 there wouldn't be rate rises till 2024.
I've got to ask you about the return of IR as a political issue. I mean, we know there's been this long-standing commitment from Labor to abolish the ABCC, but it went up another gear last week at the Business Summit with a move to return to pattern bargaining. I know there's a lot of small business players that are very upset with COSBOA's move in this direction. I think there's going to be a lot of argy-bargy behind closed doors on that issue alone, but is this a vote winner for Labor, or is it a door open now, an opportunity for the coalition?
Could go either way. Initially, it could be a vote winner because people's wages do increase, but if there are strikes, it will be a massive vote loser. So they're still working out the detail of it. Anthony Albanese and Tony Burke have to be really careful here. But there is a belief in the government that when Julia Gillard wound back work choices as IR Minister and Deputy Prime Minister around 2008, she stuffed up the Fair Work Act, that the Better Off Overall test was too rigid, and that's been a big contributor to wages not rising. So they're seeking to fix that. They're seeking to actually alter the boot, which of course they opposed in opposition when the coalition suggested it. But this multi-employer bargaining, it's kind of like giving business one thing and giving unions something as well. But the danger is, and Innes Willicks, should I say, from the Australian Industry Group has been warning about this, that this leads to more strikes, and that is the last thing Australia needs at the moment.
All businesses going to the wall either. Andrew Clennell, thank you for your time.